At the time, I was a young man and had just moved to my current home in Midtown Atlanta, Georgia. There were several smaller houses there that were built by new homeowners. It was around this time of year, early spring one night, after eating dinner with my parents at a restaurant. Something very strange had happened. After I got home, I was slouched on the couch and had just finished a beer. My folks had already gone to bed, so I was just watching some TV. I think the rage back then was Jerry Springer, so I think I remember watching that. I could feel my head becoming more and more fried by the second watching it, so I got up and walked to our patio door. We lived in the woods, a beautiful stretch of forest. Our home was situated among a nest of other houses, a little hamlet of 8 cottages surrounded by woodland. As I stood there at the patio door, I took out a joint. It was just some light hash that my buddy had got me at college. Took a puff, began coughing immediately. As I squinted, looking out into the deep woods, I could see a shape, something dark that appeared to be crawling. At first, I perceived it as a wild dog or something, but as I continued on looking, I witnessed one of the most terrifying things I'd ever seen. It was a long creature, crawling on all fours, with what seemed like bare red all skin, red as coal, shiny, damp and glistening. Its legs were kind of webbed, with what appeared to be hooves or matted fur on each foot. This creature had a missing eye, and it was kind of situated on the side of its head. I could hear it making these strange growling and grunting noises, like it was hunting. It was then that the fear began to set for my family's safety. My mind also thought of our next-door neighbor, who, at the time, was just an elderly widow. What havoc and savagery was this bizarre creature capable of? I didn't know the answer. This creature continued encircling a small woodland area, and appeared to be going around in circles. On the front of its head were 2 strange little horns. The horns appeared to be about 2 feet tall. I had no idea how I had mistaken it for a dog now that I studied it so strangely. I wondered, could this thing see me? As a precaution, I safely retreated from the patio and went back indoors, studying the woods from apparent safety of my bedroom window. This thing continued its motion for about 20 more minutes, then retreating into the woods. That night, I didn't sleep a wink. When I woke up, I told my parents. They didn't believe me, and when my dad found my marijuana, he blamed that. I'm certain about what I saw. I could still remember it, even 20 years later, as clear as day. What it was, I do not know. But it was horrible and very real. I have always been fascinated by the idea of creatures, mythical beings, and cryptids. I'm not sure why, but it might have something to do with my fascination of dragons, which I've had since I was little. Or maybe watching too many nature documentaries. Either way, this is why as a child, I spent a lot of time here in the woods. Even as an adolescent, I was always to be found at our local forestry. We have many here in Cornwall, England. It was in the mid-2000s, 2006 to be exact, when I vaguely remember walking in the woods, alone. I think I was about 17, and brave as a lion. I had no concept or interest in dangers or hidden threats. In fact, I welcomed them. I dreamed of encountering some strange creature, a ghost, a ghoul, anything that would show me the supernatural existed, and that it wasn't all BS. On this occasion, I was walking. I didn't have a cell phone then, as they didn't really explode until the late 2000s. Kids today have no idea. I was along when I heard a whistling behind me. I was deep in the woods, and the only sounds I was accustomed to hearing were birds and maybe the odd owl. A whistling indicated to me there was another human around. I kept walking and heard the whistling again. This time, I turned around, kind of pissed, because I thought it was somebody joking. Maybe some weird guy who was roaming the forest cruising. I didn't see anything. As I turned back on my tracks, I stopped dead. About 10 yards away from me was the most peculiar, terrifying creature I had ever seen. It was hairy like a gorilla with 5 legs, 2 arms, and 1 head, and 1 single eye. This was an abomination. It was shaped kind of like a spider, as it crawled in a long circle, not noticing me, thankfully. The creature was furry, apart from its head, which jutted out like a sea creature, but mostly a slimy, sickly, bloody coat of bare skin. As brave as I had made myself out to be, I felt practically sick, contemplated running. Thankfully, I always brought along a portable camera on my walk and took it out. My hands were shaking, but I managed to snap a picture. I realized this was a very dangerous situation, and I backed away, running briskly back to civilization. Naturally, I looked to myself as the chemist straight away to get the photo developed. My heart sank when I realized that the photo came out all wrong. It looked like a large red splurge on the film. Devastated and angry as I had told many people, they all thought I was lying. I don't walk much in the woods anymore. It took a bit away of my joy. That single experience, now 15 years ago. I work in a lab now that works for scientific discoveries. Often, I hope that one day we too can find answers for these terrifying creatures. The same thing that made me feel anxious and agitated for weeks. Naturally, I developed a real interest in cryptids, and I think that was what I encountered on my trip. It seems to be the only logical explanation, unless I was hallucinating. But I know that's not true. I have lived in my house for almost 10 years. I love the country, hunting, fishing, etc. Well, before we moved here, there were a couple of reports of a creature that comes from the woods when you shine your light at it, or something like that. Well, I don't know if it was real or not, but one night, I woke up at 3 a.m. in a cold sweat and had a sort of dreaded feeling. I awoke, had to make myself a cup of coffee. My mother, who was sick at the time, and I had a feeling that something bad had happened. I looked out our kitchen window and into the black night that was enveloped with the dark forest. I hated that window. I begged my husband to get a kitchen curtain put in, as looking out that always gave me the creeps. I made my coffee briskly, tried my hardest not to look out. The feeling of dread, however, would not shake, even after my coffee. I just had this overwhelming feeling that I had to get over to the kitchen window and look out, as if my mind was daring me to do it. I had to do it, so I walked over and looked out, into the dead, deafening blackness. But it wasn't an all blackness, because I saw it. That is, the creature that locals had talked about for years. I had always thought they were barking mad, but here it was, as plain as day in front of me. The creature was about the size of a cheetah, but it had no fur. Instead appeared to be waxy and mangy looking. Its legs were shorter, and it appeared very bony. It had 2 bulging eyes and a strange face. Its face seemed kind of like it was caved in or smashed, and had several large fangs sticking out of its mouth. If I had a gun right there, I would have shot at it, put this thing out of its misery, this mutated awful thing. But I was so transfixed, I was still hooking onto my cup, which was burning hot, by the way. I couldn't move. The creature turned to face me, and by force, I naturally felt my body loosen onto the kitchen table, smashing my mug and burning my hand in the process. It was as if the very force of the creature propelled me backwards. I kept shaking, crying, as if I had no conscious control over my own body. My husband awoke, finding me cowering on the floor, covered in burns and blood. I told him what had happened, and very thankfully he believed. We are now contemplating selling the house. I mean, not primarily because of that incident, but because I've had trouble sleeping ever since then. So you could say it's related. It's bittersweet for me because I love these woods. But I feel there is something evil in the forest where I live. Something savage and devilish. I want to enjoy life in nature and not live under the burden of such fear and dread. I was walking down this trail that leads through a deep forest. The trails were marked with blue diamond markers, and I had traveled over 30 feet of trail when all of a sudden, I heard a strange noise come from the woods just in front of me. It sounded like something heavy was moving through the brush. It seemed to be some sort of wild animal. I just assumed it to be a deer and kept walking briskly. I didn't want to scare it. But when I turned around to inspect, I saw something that was terrifying and gruesome. It was about the size of a dog, waxy, slimy looking. It appeared to be bleeding and cowering in a pit of pus. It had both eyes closed and was acting strange, as if it had been severely injured. It was making strange noises. I immediately vomited at the sight of this thing, and hoped that if this creature was sleeping or whatever it was, I would not wake it. Thankfully it didn't. I continued with my eyes fixed on this thing, hoping it wouldn't wake up or notice, but unable to walk away. I stood about 10 steps back and threw a stone at this creature to see what would happen. I mostly wanted to injure it, so I threw it forcefully. When I did, this thing shut up like lightning and began growling viciously. All hell became loose. That's when I realized how stupid I had been and ran with all my might, back from the trail where I'd come from, and I could hear it following me now. But at some point, I feel it gave up. I feel so lucky to be alive today. Much more research needs to be done into cryptids and wild forest creatures. There is a world of mystery out there, some of it terrifying as I had encountered. In fact, I still have nightmares about that incident, of me running, of this thing, of the sight of this thing. I hope someday I can find answers that will allow me to find peace.